Good morning, everyone. It's actually quite amazing as well as unnerving to see a full room of very intelligent and smart people at 10 a.m. On a Mumbai morning on a Monday. So thank you so much for being here. It's actually quite exciting. So from a company called WebEngage, we're in the space of marketing automation. For those of you who haven't heard about us, basically the reason you get a lot of those messages from brands trying to chase you once you've been to their platform, haven't completed a transaction, or you have, but you haven't done a second one. Right, so we feel that it's an interesting time to be in the industry thanks to the fact that there's been an insane amount of growth in the digital ecosystem. A lot of it is still to be figured out as we go along. And I just wanted to seed some thoughts on why this is going to be a big item on your agenda as we go along through this year. Yeah. So I think the word is pretty commonly heard across most of the pink papers. I think I'm not literally referring to the weather in Mumbai, which has also been the coldest in a while, but the fact that the funding ecosystem is a lot more cautious than it was. Now in that parlance, it's called the winter, which then means that the ease of access to money and the way money was being spent on driving growth is not the same anymore. And if that is the reality, then people have to turn to thoughts which are around profitability, around sustainability, around long-term plays. Yeah. So that's where the reality check has hit a lot of brands now, that you can't possibly keep acquiring your way to growth, and that's where it's the new mindset which people have to go through, and the ecosystem needs to be readier for the next step, which is what we believe is retention-led growth. The number of brands that have been born, whether you're a large company or a small one, it's the reality that consumers have a lot more choice than they had before. It's not anybody's guess that today if I'm using a particular brand of shoes or shampoo or shirts or even cars, I will remain stuck with them out of force of habit. That's not going to happen. Which then means that whenever you're trying out your digital strategy or announcing a new range of products or even just launching your market online, just acquiring a customer once will not be enough to say that this is going to be the case forever. He will not necessarily come back to you. About 80% of those customers don't actually come back, right? And I just wanted to make sure this is a little visual in nature so that the point is driven home better. And of course, easy to remember, right? I wish this could have been done practically, but turns out at an internet event, we don't seem to have connectivity, which means I'm just going to do a show of hands conversation. So don't worry about your cell phones here. Just tell me, from your own perspective, people who think the correlation between user retention and an enduring business is really strong, could you just have a show of hands here? Okay, that seems to be bordering about 25 to 30%. I'm hoping by the end of this conversation, the number looks different, and you would see a very, very strong correlation between not necessarily delivering / marketing to users, but at least watching your user retention numbers. Because people in the mobile app ecosystem, I've seen a lot of them obsess over their D1s and D7s, but I still see a lot of companies across a lot of shapes and sizes still thinking of this as a small problem in one little corner. Yeah? Once again, my love for visuals. I'm sure all of you are familiar with the story of two cats who were battling over a piece of bread. In this case, it's a cake, which they wanted to split into half, but they could not do a good job at that, which meant that there was somebody else constantly taking a little bit out of it. Now, I don't want to take names here, but obviously when you're getting into a bidding war with your competitors on an internet platform, you know who wins out of these bids, right? The house almost always wins. So that's where, if you eventually were to use this as a strategy where your capital is your moat and you want to outlast the competition by bidding higher and higher, it's eventually going to self-destruct. That's where one more graphic and one more visual, again to deliver the point home, that when we work with a lot of startups and where we see a lot of people struggling and going wrong in their journeys, is where they make choices which are driven not necessarily by long-term sustainability. We see choices made by very expedient, quick wins, kind of lower hanging fruits kind of mindset. And that's not necessarily the best way of building a business. What we feel across the whole startup success ecosystem, and I could also take this to initiatives from the old economy trying to enter the e-commerce or tech-first kind of initiatives. What you know for sure is how to deploy capital on acquiring customers. And that you could scale that up to a certain level by increasing your bids. And what tends to happen there is all the capital and resources you have available, if you constantly deploy it on some of these very aggressive measures, you tend to lose sight of the longer term, and that's where it becomes a sort of mortality as well. Because a large number of startups, and they're born, about 70 to 75% of them would probably die before their Series A. A smaller percentage nonetheless, but more of them will also die during later stages. On the contrary, if you look at companies which have been built, which have lasted and lasted to the tunes of years and probably decades, are the ones which have actually deployed capital a lot more sensibly, chosen their bets more carefully, and not got into these ego battles, essentially of me, I could outbid you tomorrow and gain more customers and get a greater market share. Again, the money being spent on advertising across the board is not coming down and at a competitive level. Now, of course, we've seen that when the challenge came in, people scaled back their spends. So the larger advertising networks are seeing the effects of that. But as a startup, if you were to burn all of your seed capital also and try to get customers out of this, it's not like those customers will come back to you tomorrow when your discounts are off and when your advertising is off, because there's somebody else who's out there to get their same market. Which means all the emphasis you need to place on your first party data, which is the customers that you have acquired, has to be looked at a lot more seriously than probably most people are used to. So 2022 that way was a bit of a reminder. So this is a picture captured at my campus in Powai, IIT Bombay. So I was really fond of cycling around that campus, and this time when I visited after a while, all the cycles that were there were in a mountain of heap. And we've seen the reality across all the different companies having to lay off people, having to shut down, having to downsize, or the repeated word, right? The renewed focus on profitability. Now, why did this come to be where it is anyone's guess. It's pretty straightforward. There was an aggressive growth path expected thanks to COVID across several industries. We've seen education take a real great leap. But in all that growth, a lot of these customers who've come into this ecosystem for the first time, who've made their first digital transaction, their first OTT subscription, are not the people who will end up doing it again and again and again, so simply. Unless you do an effective job on finding out the profitable segments and finding out the customer who will continue to behave in that fashion, you will end up losing most of them. And in that sense, the trouble is services like this bicycle business, which is actually a good service for a bunch of people, ends up also having a problem eventually, right? Because you scaled up a little faster than you should have, while your category did not expand as fast. And I see that as the truth of a lot of categories. For example, the Q-commerce, the convenience factor itself of that 10-minute delivery was a great pitch in that sense, but you also have discounts on top of it. Now, you will end up attracting a lot of people who are not willing to pay for convenience, but are coming in for the discount part of things. And tomorrow, if you were to take away those discounts, what you're left with essentially is a bunch of people who are only there for the convenience, and which actually was a sensible business to go after, right, if you think about it. But what will happen, unfortunately, is all of us consumers who like that quick commerce will also see that service go down the drain, perhaps. And I hope that doesn't happen, because they'll probably go overboard with expanding to newer categories, newer geographies, newer people, and end up hitting a dead end, right? Anybody, in terms of, while I spoke about sustainable business, I would also have a very quick sense on how do you link retention to profitability. Anybody here feels this is a strong relationship? Can I have a quick show of hands? Okay, that sounds almost the same as the previous, slightly more. So, the way if you look at quick math, and a term that most internet marketers are very familiar with is a ROAS term, right? And when I say ROAS, this is return on ad spend. So if you're looking at 4x, you're talking about 25% of your revenue spent on your advertising. It's as simple a math as that. Now, what retention does for you is get you a bunch of people back coming into your platform without spending those advertising dollars. So, very basic level math, probably from high school. If you look at blended averages, how all the people who are coming in without ad spend will actually improve your ROAS over a period of time. And that's the people who will come in probably clicking your emails, remembering your brand name, typing in directly, coming from content that you produce for organic sources, and all of those channels. And if you can continuously increase the share of such customers in your play, your ROAS can go from 4x to 6x. And if your ROAS goes from 4x to 6x, that translates into your ad spend going from 25% to 15%. And that essentially means 10% extra contribution towards your bottom line. So the linkage is very clear, very 100%. Anybody who's trying to do meaningful business digitally should factor this that, okay, if you have to really work on your ROAS, you have to make sure you do everything you can to get your new customers back into being repeat customers. So, one of the lessons, and in fact, a few of them probably as I cover, and this has been the last few years of our observation, including conversations we've had with investors, including the journeys of several startups we've seen, and in fact, of even larger organizations which have tried to go through digital transformation. we've seen that there's a certain degree of optimism which ends up making these judgment calls that you are expanding teams, you're expanding into new segments and geographies. And the whole concept of product market fit, essentially, that are you able to acquire customers for a good price, and are they coming back to you and ultimately delivering greater value? That concept seems to be left behind in the conversation. And that's where it's something that is a stark reminder for this year. 2023, we're hoping and actually quite optimistic on that one, will be a stark reminder for a lot of people to start thinking about it a little more lean, a little more focused on the long-term plays. It sometimes tends to get mixed up with bravado, sometimes with ego battles and fear-fueled games, that I'm going to miss out on some large wave if I don't do this right now. If I stop growing right now, I'll probably not be able to raise my next round of funding. But if you hear the founders which have been around long enough, you'll actually think this is probably not the first time the funding has gone dry. They've seen this happen before. It's probably going to come back with a boom, and it's also going to go back. But that's where the adulting kind of comes in. That's where the men grow from boys, and that's when you now know that this is the nature of business, and maybe I should build my business a little more carefully and differently. The whole thought process on go big and go home, I think that's been eulogized and made popular by most of the media houses as well. And we've turned these guys into heroes which have taken these large bets. But I'm somehow a bigger fan of a lot of relatively smaller but sustainable and long-term businesses, because as a founder, you're not chasing necessarily just the valuation. You might also be chasing a path which is, let's say, less risky but also more sustainable and long-term. So we do hope that the whole ego battles between companies and chasing the monkey's part of the bread does not continue to stay anymore. We've anyway seen spends on advertising networks come down significantly. So should automatically mean more focus on getting more business from existing customers. Yeah. So real value creation has to be a lot more important than valuation. Innovation and efforts around that to make sure your product is differentiated, your consumer insights are stronger, has to be a lot more emphasized than outbidding competition. And of course, to conclude my note, a retention-led growth has to be a lot more important than acquisition-led growth. So of course, I am here from WebEngage and we have a booth outside. I didn't mean to kind of make a sales pitch to all of you guys, but at least you know now that WebEngage is a company that helps you with retaining your users better. So you need to know how we go about this, how we consolidate your data, how we work with the best of brands like the Adanis and the Make My Trips and the Yatras of the world to make their user engagement much better. You're welcome to drop by and talk to our team outside. Thank you so much, everyone. I hope it does now reflect a little higher in your priorities, 2023. Thank you so much.